Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the show that, well, takes these huge, iconic stories, pulls them apart using science, history, a bit of everything, really, and sees what holds water.
Sometimes quite literally, especially today.
Exactly. Today we are wading right into one of the biggest ones, the Great Flood, Noah's Ark. A story everyone knows or thinks they know.
Yeah, and it's a story that still grips people. You have groups like Noah's Ark Ministries International spending serious money on expeditions even now. They're convinced they'll find the actual boat on Mount Ararat.
Right, those searches make headlines, but we're going to step back from that today.
Definitely. Our mission here is more about understanding the story itself.
Yeah.
We're looking at the Genesis flood narrative through, let's say, three lenses.
Okay, what are they?
First, modern science, the sort of hard physics of it all.
Yep.
Second, ancient literature and archaeology, especially from Mesopotamia, where these stories seem to originate.
Okay.
And third, practical engineering, boat design, what could actually be built back then.
Got it. So the goal isn't finding the Ark, but figuring out where the story came from, what it meant culturally.
Precisely. And that leads us to the big question. Was the flood in the Bible, a real historical planet-covering event? Or is it this incredibly powerful myth that evolved from older, maybe regional flood stories, adapted, of course, for a monotheistic view?
Okay, so where do we start peeling that back? Maybe with the science. That often seems like the biggest hurdle for a global flood.
It really is. The water problem, as it's sometimes called. If you take the text literally water covering everything, even the highest mountains, the basic physics just don't add up. There simply isn't that much water available on Earth.
Right. So how much water are we talking about, like in the atmosphere?
Well, estimates, like from the USGS, put the total water vapor in the atmosphere at around 3,100 cubic miles.
3,100 cubic miles. Sounds like a lot when you say it like that.
It does, but, spread that over the entire surface of the Earth. If all of that water rained down at once, everywhere, any guesses how deep it would be?
A few feet, maybe.
Not even close. It would cover the Earth's surface to an average depth of only about 2.5 centimeters.
2.5 centimeters, that's an inch.
Barely an inch. Yeah.
Okay. An inch of water isn't covering Mount Ararat, which is what, 17,000 feet high? Something like that?
Exactly. Over 5,000 meters. So you'd need an absolutely astronomical amount of water appearing from somewhere and then disappearing again.
What about, like, underground water? Does that help?
Not really enough. Groundwater is only about 1.7% of Earth's total water. It still leaves a massive, massive deficit.
And then there's the where did it go problem.
Right. Earth is basically a closed system for water. If you somehow added enough water to flood the globe, where does it go afterwards? And so quickly, it would leave incredible geological scars, change sea levels permanently. We just don't see evidence for that kind of event on a global scale.
People have suggested weird things, right? Like ice comets hitting the Earth or something.
Yeah, there are catastrophic scenarios proposed, but they often clash with the Bible's own description. Genesis mentions rain, yes, but also the fountains of the great deep bursting forth. Those other scenarios don't quite fit that mechanism.
Okay, but we should be fair here. There's a completely different way of looking at this if you take a literalist perspective.
Absolutely, and it's crucial we acknowledge that. For someone who believes in a literal interpretation, these scientific problems, well, they evaporate. If you have an omnipotent creator.
Then creating water or moving water, that's not bound by physics. God is outside those laws.
Exactly. The framework shifts entirely from science to miracle. And that's not something science can test or disprove. It's a matter of faith.
And some people try to bridge that gap, right, using the text itself, that fountains of the great deep line.
Yes, some interpretations suggest that phrase doesn't mean water magically appearing, but maybe massive geological shifts, tectonic plates moving rapidly, land masses sinking, ocean floors rising.
Which could make the existing water cover the land and then reverse.
That's the idea. It tries to offer a sort of quasi-scientific mechanism within the text description.
And for some believers, letting go of a literal historical flood feels like a big deal theologically.
It does. There's a concern that if you say the flood is myth, it undermines the Bible's authority. And figures like Jesus and Peter refer to Noah and the flood as if they were historical facts. So questioning the flood's historicity raises questions about their credibility too, in that view.
Okay. So the science presents huge challenges for a global flood, but the theological perspective offers a different framework. What about looking inside the text of Genesis itself? Does it read like one consistent story?
Ah, well, that's where it gets really interesting from a literary standpoint. The scholarly consensus for, well, quite a long time now, is that the flood story in Genesis isn't one single narrative. It's actually woven together from at least two older, separate flood accounts.
Two stories edited together, how can we tell? Where are the seams, so to speak?
There are several pretty clear indicators. Maybe the most obvious one is the instructions about the animals.
Right, how many animals Noah should take.
Exactly. In one part, Genesis 6, God tells Noah to bring just one pair, male and female, of every single kind of creature. Simple preservation.
Okay, makes sense.
But then, just a little later in Genesis 7, the instruction changes quite dramatically. Suddenly, it's 7 pairs of all the clean animals and only 1 pair of the unclean ones.
7 pairs of clean. Why the change?
Well, the thinking is that the source specifying 7 pairs had a different purpose in mind. Those extra clean animals were likely intended for sacrifice right after the flood ended, something the first source, just focus on survival, didn't need. It's a strong clue that 2 different traditions with different priorities got combined.
Okay, that's a pretty clear difference. Are there others?
Yes, the duration of the flood is another one. One section, Genesis 7.1 Sumeri, says the flood, the actual downpour, lasted 40 days and 40 nights.
Classic number, yeah.
But another verse, Genesis 7.24, says the waters prevailed or swelled upon the earth for 150 days.
Now, some people argue that's not a contradiction, right? Like 40 days of rain, but the water levels stayed high for 150 days total.
That's the harmonization argument, yes.
Yeah.
That the 40 days is just the raining period, and 150 is how long the water dominated the landscape before receding. It's a possible reading to smooth it out.
But there's more evidence for 2 sources, isn't there? Something about the name used for God.
That's perhaps the most compelling textual clue for scholars. When you trace these different elements, the animal numbers, the flood durations, they consistently align with different names used for God.
How so?
The parts that mention the 40 days of rain, and often the 7 pairs of clean animals, they tend to use the personal name YHWH or Yahweh, the specific covenant name for God in Israelite tradition.
Okay.
Whereas the parts that talk about the 150 days of water prevailing, and sometimes the single pair of all animals, they tend to use the more general term Elohim.
Elohim, which can just mean God or even gods in some context, right? It's less specific.
Exactly. It's a more generic term for divinity. The fact that these details cluster together so consistently, YHWH with 40 days, 7 pairs, Elohim with 150 days on pair, strongly suggests to scholars that an editor skillfully combined 2 pre-existing flood stories.
Why leave the contradictions in, though? If you're editing it together, why not smooth out the number of animals or the dates?
That's a great question. Maybe the original stories were just too important, too foundational to change drastically. So the editor chose to, let's say, juxtapose them rather than rewrite them completely.
Or maybe they serve different theological points.
That's the other main theory. One source emphasizing God's covenant and maybe ritual purity, the other focusing more on creation, human sin, and divine judgment. By weaving them together, you get a richer, more complex narrative, even if it has some rough edges.
Okay, so the text itself hints it's a composite. And that naturally leads to the next question. Where did these older stories come from? Genesis didn't just invent the flood narrative out of thin air.
Not at all. This is where we turn to Mesopotamia. The Genesis flood story is, without a doubt, an Israelite adaptation of much, much older flood myths from that region. We're talking stories written down centuries before Genesis could have been.
Like what? What are the really old ones?
Well, the earliest fragment we have is from the Sumerian Eridu Genesis, maybe around 17th century BCE. Then there's the Akkadian Atrahasis epic, which is even older, maybe 18th century BCE. That one's quite detailed.
Wow, that's old. But the most famous one, the one people might have heard of, is Gilgamesh, right?
Exactly. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The version we usually refer to comes from clay tablets found in King Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh from the 7th century BCE, but the story itself is much older.
And in Gilgamesh, there's a flood story told within the epic.
Yes. The hero, Gilgamesh, is seeking immortality, and he finds Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim is the survivor of the Great Flood, granted immortality by the gods, and he tells Gilgamesh the whole story.
And how similar is Utnapishtim's story to Noah's?
It's incredibly similar in the basic structure. You have the gods deciding to wipe out humanity. One god, Ea, secretly warns Utnapishtim. He tells him to build a boat.
Okay.
And Utnapishtim builds the boat, loads his family, his craftsmen, animals, and treasures. The flood comes, destroys everything else. He sends out birds, a dove, a swallow, a raven to see if the waters have receded.
Just like Noah sending out the raven and the dove.
Precisely. Then the boat lands on a mountain. The Napishtim gets out, offers a sacrifice, and the gods smell the sweet savor. There's even a moment where the gods regret the destruction.
Wow, the parallels are undeniable. So the Israelites clearly knew these stories.
They must have. These narratives were widespread in the ancient Near East, but the genius isn't how they adapted it. The Mesopotamian versions often have, well, less noble reasons for the flood.
What do you mean?
In Atrahasis, the gods decide to destroy humanity, basically, because humans are too noisy. They're making such a racket that the head god, Enlil, can't sleep.
Seriously, that's the reason. Divine irritation.
Pretty much, it's quite capricious. So the Israelite writers took this existing story framework, divine decision, warning, boat, survival, sacrifice, but they infused it with a strong ethical and theological message.
They gave it a why.
Exactly. The flood isn't because humans were annoying. It's a consequence of human wickedness, violence, and moral corruption. God acts not out of irritation, but out of justice. And importantly, God establishes a covenant afterwards, the rainbow, promising never to do it again. It transforms the story.
So taking a polytheistic myth about noisy humans and turning it into a monotheistic lesson about morality and covenant.
That's the essence of it. It shows how they engaged with the surrounding culture, but reshaped its stories to fit their unique theological vision.
Okay, this is fascinating. We've got the Mesopotamian roots. Now, let's get back to the boat itself. You mentioned Utnapishtim builds a boat. Did these older stories describe it?
Ah, yes. And this leads to a relatively recent and pretty stunning discovery, or rather, reinterpretation. It comes from the work of Irving Finkel at the British Museum.
What did he find?
He was working with a small clay tablet, now called the Ark tablet. It dates to around 1700 BCE, so it's contemporary with Atrahasis, and it contains instructions from the god Ea to Atrahasis, who is the hero in that version, on how to build the Ark.
Instructions, like actual dimensions.
Yes. And here's the bombshell. The god tells Atrahasis to draw the design on the ground and specifies that its length and breadth should be equal. He commands him to build a circular vessel.
Circular, not the long rectangular barge we always picture from Genesis.
Nope. A giant round boat. Finkel realized immediately what this was describing. It was a massive version of a traditional Mesopotamian riverboat called Kuphar, or sometimes Kufa.
A kuphar, like a
giant basket.
Yes, a huge, round, woven coracle, waterproofed with bitumen. So the oldest textual instruction we have for the Ark describes a vessel radically different from the popular image, but one that was actually used in Mesopotamia for millennia.
Wow. Okay, that changes things. Forget the giant wooden barge for a moment. Let's talk about this Kuphar. What exactly is it? It's a type of coracle. A round boat. The name itself comes from the Arabic kufa, meaning basket, which probably links back to the even older Akkadian word kupu, also meaning basket or container. They were made by weaving reeds or willow branches into a frame and then covering it, usually with animal skins, and coating the whole thing heavily with bitumen natural asphalt or pitch to make it waterproof.
And these were common on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Extremely common. For thousands of years, they were the workhorses of the rivers.
Why circular, though? It seems like it would be hard to steer.
It is hard to steer in a straight line against a current, that's true. It tends to spin. But the circular shape offers incredible advantages, especially in unpredictable flood conditions.
Like what?
Stability. It's very, very difficult to capsize a round boat. Think about it. It doesn't have a vulnerable long side to catch the waves or current. It just sort of bobs and turns. Also, structurally, a round basket is inherently strong and less likely to break apart under stress than a long joined hull made with ancient techniques.
So, for surviving a chaotic river flood, maybe not a global ocean, but a massive river flood, a giant kuphar actually makes a lot of sense engineering-wise.
It makes perfect sense. It's the ideal design for stability and resilience using the materials they had readily available.
Do we have pictures or descriptions of these things from ancient times, apart from the Ark tablet?
Oh, absolutely. We have depictions on Assyrian palace reliefs going back to the 9th century BCE. You can see kings like Ashurnasirpal II, Sennacherib crossing rivers in these round boats, transporting chariots, timbers, soldiers.
Wow.
And then we have an amazing eyewitness account from the Greek historian Herodotus. He visited Babylon around 450 BCE and wrote about them in detail.
Herodotus, what did he say?
He described them exactly. Circular, made of willow frames, stretched with skins, waterproofed with bitumen and filled with straw, probably for extra buoyancy or padding for cargo. He said they were used to carry goods, especially casks of wine, downstream to Babylon.
Okay, and how big were they?
Herodotus mentioned some very large ones, though his weight estimates might be a bit high. But based on the reliefs and later examples, we know they could be quite substantial. Some ancient Kuphars reached diameters of up to 18 feet, maybe 5.5 meters.
18 feet across, that's big. How much could something like that carry?
Reliable estimates suggest a Kuphar that size could potentially transport up to 16 tons of cargo, so not insignificant.
16 tons, okay. But you said they went downstream. What about getting back? You mentioned they spin?
Herodotus explains this too, and it's brilliant. The current on the Tigris and Euphrates was too strong for these round boats to paddle back upstream effectively.
Yeah.
So they didn't even try.
What did they do then?
They essentially treated the boat as partially disposable. When they got to their destination, say Babylon, they'd unload the cargo. Then, Herodotus says, they'd sell the willow framework and the straw.
Sell the frame.
Yeah, for firewood, presumably. But they kept the valuable part, the animal skins used for waterproofing. They'd fold those up. And here's the kicker. Herodotus says every Kuphar carried at least one live donkey on board.
A donkey? On the boat? Why?
To carry the skins back upstream, they'd load the folded hides onto the donkey and walk back along the riverbank to build another Kuphar or reuse the skins.
That is incredibly practical and kind of hilarious. A boat that comes with its own return trip pack animal?
It shows us deep understanding of the environment, the materials, the economics of transport, using local, lightweight, somewhat disposable materials combined with animal power. It was a really integrated system.
And this design, the Kuphar or coracle, it wasn't just stuck in Mesopotamia, was it?
No, ethnographers believe this basic circular woven boat design is incredibly ancient and likely the ancestor of similar coracles found all across Eurasia, even over in the British Isles, like the Welsh coracles. It seems to be a fundamental boat-building idea that spread widely.
And maybe influenced other stories, too. You hear about babies in baskets on rivers.
Exactly. The story of Moses and the bulrushes, an ark or basket sealed with pitch floating on the Nile. That imagery resonates strongly with Mesopotamian legends about figures like Sargon of Akkad being set adrift in a basket on the Euphrates. The basket on the water is a powerful recurring motif in the region.
Okay. So the oldest ark instruction says build around Kuphar. Kuphars were real, stable, documented Mesopotamian boats ideal for river floods. The whole picture starts to look less like a global miracle barge and more like a scaled-up version of local, proven technology.
Precisely. It grounds the idea of the ark in something historically and technologically plausible for that time and place.
Now, people have tried to build replicas, haven't they? Both the rectangular biblical ark and maybe even these giant Kuphars. How did that go?
It's generally gone not great. Replicas of the huge rectangular ark described in Genesis often run into massive structural problems, especially when trying to use only traditional methods. They're just too long and unwieldy. Yep. And even attempts to build a single gigantic Kuphar based on the ark tablet. There was one built in India a few years back. Often need modern assists, like hidden steel frames or airbags, just to float or hold their shape. Scaling up ancient basketry and bitumen waterproofing to that immense size presents huge engineering challenges.
So just making one giant version, round or rectangular, might still be beyond ancient capabilities, even if the type of boat the Kuphar was known.
It seems likely. Which brings us to a really interesting modern project that takes a different approach. It's called Arc Reimagined, run by Safina Projects, led by artists Rashad Salim and Hannah Lewis.
Arc Reimagined, what's their idea?
Their starting point is really smart. They argue that if a real community in ancient Mesopotamia faced a catastrophic flood, they wouldn't suddenly try to invent and build one enormous, unprecedented superboat from scratch using a divine blueprint.
What would they do instead?
They'd use what they already knew. They'd pool their existing skills, their existing boats, their local materials, and work together. So Arc Reimagined doesn't picture the Ark as one single vessel at all.
So, what then? A fleet?
Sort of. More like a composite structure. They envision the Ark as a collection of traditional Mesopotamian boats. Guffas, kileks, zymas, all lashed together securely into a stable, unified platform, a gathered ark.
Guffas, okay, those are the round Kuphars. What are kileks and zymas?
Kileks are rafts, basically platforms built on top of inflated animal skins for buoyancy. Really common for carrying heavy loads. Zymas are long, slender canoes made from bundles of reeds and waterproofed with bitumen, good for navigating marshy areas.
So they'd bring together all the different types of local watercraft?
Exactly. lash them together using ropes made from local fibers. And the geometry they propose for holding them together is fascinating.
What is it?
It's based on a fundamental pattern found in nature and ancient Mesopotamian art and architecture, the idea of 6 around 1. Think of a central element with 6 identical elements surrounding it, forming a hexagon or a flower shape. It's sometimes called the Sabayun pattern.
6 around 1. Where do you see that?
It's in early temple decorations at Uruk, in mosaics. It's seen in natural forms like honeycombs or crystal structures. It's a very stable, efficient way to pack things together. In their model, the round guffas might form the core clusters within this pattern.
Okay, so you have this floating platform made of different boats tied together. What about shelter? Living space?
For the superstructure, they look to another traditional Iraqi craft, the construction of the mudhif.
The Moodheath.
Yes, the amazing large communal houses built by the marsh Arabs of southern Iraq. They're made entirely from bundled reeds, bent and tied to create these beautiful, high-vaulted ceilings, almost like natural cathedrals, strong, lightweight, and uses readily available material. So the ark's shelter could be built using those same techniques on top of the boat platform.
Wow, so the whole thing is built from existing local knowledge and materials.
Every part of it. Reed bundles, palm logs, bitumen, animal skins, locally made ropes, and they even thought about the cultural heart of it.
How so?
In their designs and models, they often place a traditional clay oven, a firin or hearth, right in the center of the main cluster of guffas.
A kitchen at the heart of the ark.
Exactly. Symbolizing that survival isn't just about staying afloat, it's about maintaining community, culture, the ability to share food and warmth. It anchors the structure culturally.
This project, Safina Projects, it's not just theoretical, is it? They're actually working with these crafts.
Oh yeah, it's very practical. A big part of their mission is using the ark idea as a catalyst to revive these very crafts in Iraq, many of which are endangered. Boat building, rope making, weaving skills that have been declining rapidly due to conflict, environmental change, and modernization.
So it connects the ancient story directly to modern cultural preservation and even economic development.
Absolutely. They work, for example, with women in communities, particularly those who might be marginalized, like widows or divorcees, supporting traditional textile crafts, like Samoa rug making.
How do the rugs connect to the ark?
They encourage the weavers to incorporate the ark narrative and its iconography, like that 6 around 1 Sabayon geometric pattern, into their rug designs. So it provides income, preserves weaving skills, and keeps the cultural story alive in a tangible way. It's all interconnected.
That's really powerful, linking the mythic past to present-day livelihoods. Okay, let's think about the end of the story. The floodwaters go down. What happens to this gathered ark? Does it have an advantage over a single giant boat then?
A huge advantage. Think about it. If a single massive ark lands, what you have is one enormous, probably damaged, and largely useless structure sitting on a mountainside.
Right. Hard to do much with it.
But the gathered ark, once the waters recede, you untie the ropes, and what do you have?
You have individual boats again. Guffas, Keelix, Siamis.
Exactly. You immediately have a fleet of functional watercraft ready for the community to use for resettlement, for transport, for fishing, for exploring the post-flood world. The survival structure itself provides the tools needed for rebuilding.
The ark disassembles into the very components needed to start over. That's brilliant.
It means the knowledge of how to build, use, and repair those boats, the core craft skills, are inherently part of the survival package. The ark doesn't just save people, it saves the technology they need to live.
Okay. So wrapping this up, we've gone from questioning the sheer possibility of a global flood based on science
to seeing the hints of multiple sources edited together within Genesis itself.
then tracing the story's clear origins back to much older Mesopotamian myths like Gilgamesh and Atrahasis.
Discovering that the earliest instruction describes a round boat, the Kuphar, a real vessel perfectly suited for Mesopotamian river floods.
And finally, considering this idea of a gathered ark, built collectively from local crafts, which seems both technologically plausible for ancient people and incredibly practical for survival and resettlement.
It really shifts the perspective. Whether the original event was a massive regional flood, maybe the bursting of river levees, or something else entirely, the myth that grew out of it became this powerful vehicle.
A vehicle for what?
For teaching ethics, explaining disaster, but also, perhaps unintentionally, for preserving the memory of incredible human ingenuity. How ancient people used simple geometry, local reeds, bitumen, animal hides, humble materials to create resilience and ensure community survival.
That 6-around-1 pattern, the bundled reeds, the waterproof basketry, simple ideas, profound results.
Which leads us to that final thought for you listening. Maybe the real miracle in the Ark story isn't supernatural intervention. Maybe it's the testament to human cooperation, to collective action using accessible local technology.
The power of simple, shared craft knowledge, like that humble, woven basket boat.
So, if an ancient community could theoretically build a vessel for survival by gathering the skills and boats already present in their village,
The question we leave you with is, what are the fundamental resources, the essential skills, the collaborative networks in your own community right now? What are the reeds and bitumen around you that could be woven together to provide resilience in the face of whatever crisis might come next, whether it's environmental, social, or something else?
sometimes the most powerful solutions aren't the most complex. They might be rooted in simple, shared local knowledge. Something to think about.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.